Alright, so what we have here is VDJ 79, and this is your front output seal that's leaking off the transfer case. So this is your front drive shaft. So we're going to change the seal in here. To do so, we have to pull off the drive shaft. So you got these 4 nuts here, and this housing actually has to come off the transfer case on these, because as you'll see when I take this off, there's no nut on this flange. So I've undone the 4 bolts, or nuts rather, and so this slip joint's actually buggered, because as I'm compressing this to give me enough room, all the grease is pushing out the back of the slip joint. Usually you would undo this grease nipple here and compress it, or you can undo the other 4 and pull the whole shaft out. So usually I just undo these 4, compress the slip joint and pull the shaft off. Alright, so as you can see, there's no nut on this little flange here. However, we have oil leaking out behind the flange. So these bolts here unbolt the front cover of this transfer case. So we'll go around and undo those, and I'll show you afterwards.
Make sure that you drain the transfer case. Just make sure you remove the 6 bolts and then disconnect the transfer case switch connector.
There's actually a very good tank here that you can put a bar on and hit the back of your bar, and it will start to open up this gap here. Alright, as you can see, there's a ball bearing, a spring, and the cap that puts the load on. Now these go in here. Usually the ball bearing doesn't fall out, however mine did. So it should sit kind of like this ball bearing does, but half in that hole. So what you do is, if this happens, put this case back on without it in, then drop your ball bearing, then your spring, and then do up this cap once it's all in on the car. Alright, so once you take off the circlip that sits around here, in that groove there, sometimes, so this is just a 22mm socket, sometimes you can sit it there and knock the shaft through this gear, but sometimes that's not the case, so I'm going to have to use an oxy and heat it up. As you can see, just knocking it through. She's starting to come out now.
As you can see here, I've used my seal pick to pick out the seal and to remove the dust deflector. I've then used a rubber mallet to install the dust deflector, make sure the groove is facing out, and then install the seal with a rubber mallet. So I'm just showing you how you get all this crap built up on the shaft here. I use a green scouring pad to clean it all up, as you'll see. Once it's all nice and clean, I go ahead and install the shaft. I actually forgot to film this part, but I install it not this way up, but with the case facing the other way up. I just sit it in the vise with some rags protecting the sealing face. I knock the shaft the whole way in, as you can see it now. So just pay attention to how I have the flange supported in the vise. That way you don't damage the studs. I then use a 36mm socket, as you can see here, to knock the gear the whole way down. Right until there's enough room for the circlip to go back on. Alright, so we've got this housing back together and assembled. So now we're going to come up here and we're just going to give a light wire brush, clean any of this old existing sealant off. I'm going to be using Toyota Black to reseal it. I know that Toyota use an orange goo on all their transfer cases and gearboxes, but I've used this stuff heaps and it's never leaked, never had a problem with it, so I'm going to keep doing what I do. But yeah, so once she's clean, I'll put a light smear on there, and then I'll run smear around here and we'll push it all back together. So now that they're both clean,
I'll put a little bead on each, and then we'll push it together, and we're leaving this detent out, so this ball bearing spring out. So next time I do it, I'm going to actually take them out first and try and fish them out with a magnet. So they sit in here, and they're actually stopping me from getting the case apart the first time round. So next time I'd probably come from up top. It's a T40 Torx bit. Pop out that plug and then fish both of them out with a magnet if possible, and see if that is easier. Okay, so I ended up taking out the transfer case switch as well, just in case that was stopping on that shaft that I was talking about. So when you pop it in, make sure you don't wipe off any of your sealant on here, on this cross member. And your main focus is to make sure you get that shaft to line up or locate in this hole here in the case. I just gave it a light tap and it actually went, it's kind of sunk and on. And then there's still a bit of a gap, and you just want to turn this shaft until you feel the gear mesh, and then just push it in the rest of the way. Basically fully together. Before you wind any bolts in, do not pull it in with your bolts. All the gears, or that little gear and selector, need to mesh before you wind them in, or you will bugger it. So alright, so going back together, we want to get our detent ball, drop it in this first hole right there. Just drop it in there, make sure it's in that hole and not the switch hole. Drop him in there, get your spring, drop your spring in there, make sure it doesn't hang out the top. Now we're going to put just a little bit of Loctite on these because they had green Loctite on them from factory. So going to put a little bit of Loctite on there and wind him down tight into that front hole. Alright, so once your detent is done up, your transfer case switch is wound back in, which is a 27mm spanner. That's how I did that. You want to put your connector back on. Like so. Make sure you push the rubber boot back down to try and stop the connector filling up with mud. They sort of work, but then you can connect up your drive shaft, give it some time to cure, and then what we will do is fill up the transfer case. Make sure you fill it up, don't forget, or you'll know about it. Alright, so just filling up the transfer case. Most plugs will be a 24mm like this. However, this vehicle has an aftermarket 19mm plug. So once it's running out, we can take it out. And I'll let it run for just a little bit, and then we'll put the plug back in and make sure we do it up nice and tight. Whenever I get to the end of a job, I like to check over everything, make sure all bolts, nuts, washers are down tight. Check your connectors, make sure they don't pull back off, make sure your boots are on. Go and check the torque on your fuel and drain plugs. It's a very important one, don't want them falling out. Anyway, that's the job done. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this helps you out. Thank you.